Hi there, I'm Dave Glanz here for EYEDESYN.com, and I am here today to talk about sculpting in ZBrush. We'll be talking about sculpting in Cinema 4D and a bit about how the new volume object in R20 can help you get started with creating base meshes. We'll then move on to ZBrush, get an overview of the interface, the workflow, how it compares to Cinema 4D, and try to answer the question, why would you want to use it? It's expensive, it's a little bit scary, but it's also fun. So, if you like this tutorial and you want to learn more about ZBrush, let me know, let EJ know, let us both know, and we will try to do more of them. So let's jump right into Cinema 4D and get started. I'm going to start things off maybe with a sphere. So I'm going to go up to this primitive menu. It's not a primitive menu, it's a menu with primitives. And I'm going to go over to this sphere primitive. Yeah, I have a nice view of the yard from my office here. So I see a lot of squirrels, a lot of chipmunks. I think maybe I'm going to give a squirrel head a try here. One thing I want to do is I want to be able to see the layout of my geometry a little better. And one way to do that is to go up to Display and click Ground Shading Lines. And there I have the ability to see the geometry a little better, the way the quads and triangles are laid out. So let's duplicate that by hitting Command, drag. You can also hit Command D. No, you can't. You can hit Command C, Command V, and then you have another sphere. I'm going to bring that up and drop it in a symmetry object. There's a couple ways to get a symmetry object. I can go up to this menu here, and I have a number of options, and I can find the symmetry object right there. I can also hit Command C on my keyboard, and that brings up this little command manager. So I could just type in symmetry and then drop this sphere as a child of the symmetry object, and nothing happens. But if I go back to ZY and then back up to XY, you'll see that there is my little Mickey Mouse head. So let's squash these guys to make them look a little bit more like ears. I am going to go over to this menu on the left here. Here there's Model and Object. I'm going to select Object. If I hit T for Scale and go back to my sphere, watch what happens over here with the scale. I can squash it. I'm going to back it up, stretch them out a little bit, and maybe drop a nose. Let's duplicate that by hitting Command and dragging below. Hit T to scale, and bring him up, or her, could be a her. And these ears aren't connected, so let's scale them up. We're just looking for the very beginnings of a base mesh here. Something that might make sculpting this thing a little easier. Maybe back the ears and nose up a little bit. And add in another primitive. I'm going to go up to here and add a cylinder. Scale him up, hit R for rotate, or click on the menu up here. Bring him down. And I have something that resembles a head. The next step here is to figure out a way to bind all this geometry together in a way that is going to make sculpting easier. So one thing that R20 has that I love is this new volume system. So I'm going to go up to volume, like so. I'm going to click on this little area here so that it undocks the panel. You can dock and undock panels in Cinema 4D, of course. And I'm going to click the volume builder. Maybe I'll just drag this over here to keep it docked. And I'm going to select all these objects and drag them as a child of the volume builder. And there is a pixelated version of the sculpt. Click on the volume builder, go to Object, and reduce the voxel size a little bit, maybe to 7. Sounds good. And all this stuff is procedural, and you can move your objects around. Gonna move the neck up a little bit. Squirrels kind of have big necks, actually. Good enough for now. So let's drop this in a volume mesher. I'm gonna click volume mesher, and you see it brings one up into the object manager, and drag this under. And now I have connected geometry with smooth transitions between objects, which is very helpful. The layout of the polygons is what you would call topology, and the topology of these meshed objects, it's laid out in a way that makes it possible to animate. It's not exactly the best setup for sculpting, but it will still do. It'll work. I'm going to select my volume measure and drop it in the connect object, which I think you can find here. Connect. Drop it in. And I am going to duplicate it by hitting Command-C, Command-V. And hide the original and make this one big editable object by going over here to this menu. Click. And rename it head. So now we have a single piece of geometry to work with for sculpting. I'm going to go over to my layout menu up here on the upper right, go into Sculpt Layout, and you probably can't see it anymore, so I'm going to bring this window back up, and I'm going to hit Subdivide, and you'll see nothing really happened. But basically what that did is put a sculpting tag on the object. So let's subdivide it again and just leave it there at one level. Good. All right. And one thing you'll notice is if you have the grab brush and you're in object mode, it won't work. You need to be in model mode. I'm going to hold down Command Shift and drag on my tablet, and that's going to increase the size of the brush. You can also go into your grab brush settings and increase the size here. Let's start making a squirrel head. So I'm going to stretch the ears up a little bit, maybe this way. Increase the size a little bit, get the nose out here. Not really looking like a squirrel, but we'll get a little bit close. Pull out a little bit of a body shape here. Maybe bring the nose down. Nose is kind of funky here. Whoa. Something like this. And if you start to get into a situation where your sculpts are looking lumpy, you can hold down Shift and that will smooth. You can also go into the smooth brush here, but much easier just to hit Shift and do it that way. So things are looking pretty good. Let's say we want to add a mouth. I might use this knife brush here, bring it down, and then start to scrape out a mouth. And maybe I want to add a little bit of more detail here, so I might go into my wax brush, which kind of lets me build up some form here. And not too bad. If I turn off the lines and I just go into Garrett shading, you can see it's not looking terrific. It's looking okay. You can subdivide again and you get something a little smoother, and we can turn back on lines. But if I were to go in here and let's say get back into the knife and start to cut a little bit more, you can see what's happening to the geometry here. Now that also happens in ZBrush, but there are tools that a program like ZBrush has that will redistribute the geometry and topology. The topology is the way the quads are laid out across your object in a way that doesn't cause stretching. Now, if you were to get into some more extreme situations here, like if I were to grab this ear and just drag it out and then drag it out some more, let's not do that. Let's drag this over here and here. You can see what's happening. So if I wanted to take this one piece of, it's looking more like a moose now. If I wanted to take this down here and start to sculpt something like a body, I can only stretch this so far before it becomes unusable. If you want to go further, we'll want to be in a program like ZBrush. So let's wrap this Cinema 4D portion up and move on to ZBrush. Now, ZBrush is a digital sculpting tool. It's meant to create high-res models with very little processor overhead. So it's great for creating assets for AR, VR, games, motion graphics, and concept art. And it's a bit bonkers. The interface is a lot different than any other program I've ever used before. When you first open it, and you can grab a demo from Pixologic's website, that's Pixo Logic, you can download a trial. When you open ZBrush, usually the lightbox comes on by default, and you have a submenu here where you can browse through projects, tools, brushes, alphas. What we're going to focus on today are brushes and tools. Those are really the essential parts of ZBrush. Let's get rid of this lightbox. Let's click on lightbox, and you'll notice we have some buttons on the right and left. On the right side, we have buttons that control the stage here in the middle. We have some buttons that will control the 3D camera movement. You'll also notice this little divider, this little arrow here on the right. If I double click it, it opens up a panel on the right here. You'll see it says Tool, Tools are like objects in Cinema 4D. If I were to click on Simple Brush, I get a bunch of primitives that I can choose. So let's start out with the basic sphere here. Once I select that, I have a brush here where I can pull out a sphere. I can't do anything with it until I come up here to the left, and right next to Lightbox, you'll notice I have some other buttons here. I have Edit, Rotate, Scale, and Move. I need to click Edit or hit T on the keyboard. And once I do that, I have an interface that I can actually work with. I can rotate around this object. I can use these buttons on the right side here to rotate or zoom in and out or move, pan back and forth. I can also click and drag on any point outside of the object that I'm sculpting or modeling, and that will rotate. If I hit Alt or Option on the keyboard, I can pan back and forth. And if I let go of Alt and Option while I'm still pressing down, I can zoom in and out. It actually becomes a pretty intuitive way of working, especially when you combine it with another really cool navigation trick that ZBrush has, which is the ability to snap to different views. So if I'm clicking here, I can hold down Shift and it snaps, which becomes very useful if you are modeling with reference material behind the object. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. We'll go back to this tool menu up here. And you'll notice that we have a jumble of buttons that look like they were just kind of, I don't know, Tetris together. Is that a word? Tetris together? They just kind of smashed this interface together. If I click Make Polymesh 3D, the color changes and the menu below the tools changed. So I can actually access a lot of the sculpting stuff that I couldn't access before. We have masking panel. We have a deformation panel where you can twist things, you can squeeze things, like modifiers in Cinema 4D. You can deal with UV maps, texture maps, displacement maps. If you were looking carefully, you'll notice in the upper left here, we have this little slider under the Draw, Move, Scale, Rotate, and Edit. This is the history slider. ZBrush has the ability to save, I think, up to 10,000 steps, which is just ridiculous. Your file size can increase dramatically with all these steps, so it's just something to be cautious of. You can actually delete your history by going up to the Edit menu and clicking Delete History. And while we're up here, I should point out that ZBrush has this menu system in alphabetical order, which I suppose is logical, but I'm used to menu systems where the most important thing is on the left and the least important thing is on the right. But that said, once you get used to it, just like any other program, it's not that big of a problem. You'll notice when I clicked on Tool, the tool menu on the right side disappeared. That's because we don't want to be looking at two menus with the same content. You can drag this menu over here. I can drag it on this side, or if I go to the left side, I can double click on this menu here. You'll notice I have the brushes here, and I can drag that same menu. Well, let's try a different menu. Let's try the transform menu. I can drag this menu over to the side, and now I have a bunch of menus over here. I can pretty much just stack all these up on the right or left if I wanted to, which I don't want to. So we'll just leave the tools open and we'll open the brushes here. Brushes are kind of the heart of ZBrush. So let's see what happens if I select this standard brush. You can hit B on your keyboard to bring up a brush menu, or you can click on the brushes and you get a bunch of different brushes here. I believe these are the default brushes. Some of the most useful ones are the clay buildup, the standard brush, the Dam standard brush, which is actually for Damien standard, I believe. We have trim adaptive. We have the move brushes over here. You can isolate these by hitting first letter of the brush. So if I wanted to just see the letter C, I could hit C on the keyboard. And then I get these other letters that will let me isolate them even further. So if I wanted the clay buildup brush, which I use frequently, I would hit B. And now I have the clay buildup brush selected. So I could go to my fine little sphere over here. So I could start just sculpting away. I could just start pulling geometry out here. I don't have a lot of geometry I'm working with. I'm going to double click on the side here and take a look on the top left where it lets me know my active points. 8,000, that's not a lot of points. ZBrush can handle millions of points, so we could continue to divide this up. Let's give that a try. I'm going to click on this menu here, the Subtool. Tools are a little bit like objects in Cinema 4D. Subtools are a little bit like layers. I can append or insert different objects if I wanted to. I could append, let's say, a cube, and now I have this sphere and this cube to work with. Let's delete that for now, though. If I select this object, I can go down to Geometry. I have this Divide button, so let's click it. This is like the Subdivide button of Cinema 4D, so if I keep clicking this, my point count should be increasing. Let's check it out. Double click on here so we can see 520,000. That's a lot more. I'm going to click on the Line Fill Polyframe button, and now we see a little bit more geometry here, and it's getting kind of crazy. Let's back this up a little bit. Go back to our sphere. This object does not have symmetry enabled yet. The way we enable it globally is by going to Transform and clicking Activate Symmetry. I can also click X, and that will give me the ability to sculpt symmetrically. I can go up to my brushes and I can go into the Move tool here. I can click M if I want to, Move, and I'm going to increase my brush size. First, let's snap this to the middle, move it over. There are a couple ways to access your brush size. You can go up to the top here and I can increase the brush size here. I can right click and I get this menu. I can also hit the space bar, which is what I tend to do, increase the draw size. I can also adjust this fall off, which they call focal shift. And the intensity, the Z intensity, is how powerful the brush is. If I'm down here to number 6, it's not going to be that powerful. It's not going to do much. If I raise it up to 100, then it's going to move it very easily. So if I were to want to drag part of this out, I could just drag this out. Now, if you remember in Cinema 4D, we were running into the problem of the geometry getting stretched out and the polygon, the topology. The topology, again, is how the geometry is spread across the surface of an object. I'm running into that same issue here where this is probably not the best way to have the geometry laid on here. And we're going to get into one of my favorite things about ZBrush, which is the Dynamesh. You can find Dynamesh by going under the Geometry panel, and you'll see it says Dynamesh here. We can click Dynamesh, and that's going to give us a different way of sculpting. First thing to be aware of, though, is that the resolution here is something you want to set. By default, 128 is pretty good. You have some other options here that we can talk about another time. But let's just go ahead and click Dynamesh and see what happens. First thing that happens is ZBrush yells at me. Would you like to freeze subdivision levels? Since we divided this, let's click No and see what happens. No. So what that did is it just, I believe, it just used whatever level we were on. At first, might not feel too different, especially if you don't have polyframes turned on. If you don't see the lines, it looks pretty much the same. If I zoom in, the topology it's trying to adapt to the way things are bent and sculpted and moved around in your object. So if I were to start moving things around like this, and let's just get a little dramatic with this. Move it like this, like this, like this. Okay, now we have really goofy looking topology. If I want to rearrange the way this is distributed, all I have to do, and let's just move in a little bit here. All I have to do is hit Command and drag. And that I did that a little bit too fast. Let's undo. So Command and drag off here. And it says mask, but that's not what's happening here. It's Dynameshing. And you'll see that the topology has been rearranged so that I have the same form, but all of the polygons are stretched out across here in a way that will let me continue sculpting and not have a mess to work with. So I can smooth this here. I can, just like in Cinema 4D, I can hold down Shift to smooth. Let's turn off the polyframe here. And of course, this is a big hunk of nothing. So let's think about what we were making in Cinema 4D. We were making a squirrel head. Maybe we can take some of what we learned here with the tools and the brushes and actually try to sculpt something. So I've got coffee in hand and a squirrel model loaded up here. The first thing I'd like to do is just focus on the model of the squirrel, and you'll see I have a few different items here on my Subtool menu. I have the squirrel, the branch, the acorn, the bust. So I'm going to go down to my button area here on the right, and you'll see there's a dynamic solo button. Click that, and I can just focus on one subtool, which in this case is the squirrel. If I were to click on the branch, it would show me that, the acorn. So let's zoom in a little bit here and hold down Shift to snap to this view. If I go over to my buttons on the left here, my brush menu, and I select brush, well, I see a lot of stuff. I see all these brushes. I just want to be able to select items that are for isolating only. So if I hold down Control, I get just my mask brushes here. Let's say I select the mask lasso by holding down Control and Option. And that gives me the area to work on right here. If I want to deselect the mask, I can just do Control and drag off on this area over here. What I want to do is actually trim the head off here. Sorry, squirrel. So let's do that. I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, and you'll see the buttons change once again. This time to clip, slice, and trim buttons. I'm going to just use a simple lasso here, trim lasso. So if I hold down Control, Shift, you'll see the button changes. Let go, goes back. Control Shift, goes to my trim. I'm going to drag a little thing around here and wait for the mesh to slice. And that's not what I wanted. So what happened there is the trim is going to depend on the direction I drag my pen or mouse. In this case, I went counterclockwise, so it gave me the bottom selection. So if I hit undo and try it again, but go clockwise, that should just give me the head. Take a sip of coffee, and voila. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit here, and let's open up a new project in ZBrush. So I'm going to go to Project, select a Dynamesh sphere, hit no, I don't want to save. Let's actually move this over here because I am right-handed. So let's see what we have here. We have a sphere, and we have the snake hook brush selected. So we can see both of our brushes here. I can see over here that I have a nose that kind of just sticks out like that, so I can just drag this area out a little bit. The head kind of goes up a little bit like this. I can just kind of pull the clay. Let's move over to a different view of the squirrel. Let's say I want to view the front. I can see the nose comes to a point here, and it's always good to use reference, I think, especially with sculpting. I think it helps. I created this based on just a couple photographs of squirrels and went about making it look a little bit more cartoony. So I think what I could do is I could hold down Control Option will let me select just the spot I want, and that is the wrong. Nah, that looks right. Let's go ahead and pull that up. I'll hold down Shift to smooth it out a little bit. We can see that the head needs to be stretched out a little bit, so I can stretch out the head, pulling along the top here. And we're getting some of the basic form in. We can have the back of the head go down a little bit. So I think we have a half decent start here. I'm going to go into my clay buildup brush. So let's move this back over here. And I'm going to go into my alpha. I'm going to select this alpha 6. And let's lower my brush size. So, spacebar, lower the brush size. Let's try giving this guy some eye holes here. Zoom in a little bit. Move him over here. And I'm going to hold down Option. And I can just start dragging in a little bit of an eye hole here. And it's not looking fantastic. If you remember, with Dynamesh, the geometry that you see getting a little messed up here can be fixed by holding down Control and dragging. Turn off that. Still not perfect. That's okay. I'm going to use my clay buildup brush to just kind of start to create a little bit more volume here. I can start adding some cheeks here. I'm going to increase my brush size. I'm going to add some volume up here. And maybe we'll maybe pop in a little nose here. So let's just do something like that. Let's see what else we have. The cheek, maybe add a little bit more here on the side. Just kind of gently brush in some nose, a bridge here, a nose bridge, bridge nose, whatever you call it. And personally, I find this whole process a little soothing. It reminds me of painting. I'm going to go into my move brush this time. Increase the size and try to move things around a little bit here. I could probably bring the sides of the head in a little bit. Maybe bring the ears in a little bit. Round off the head a little bit. Still not looking exactly like what I had done. This is definitely looking funky up here. Let's bring this up. And I think this overall area right here probably could stand to move in a little bit. So let's actually mask that off by holding down Control, Option, and increase my brush size. And maybe let's just kind of move this in a little bit. The nose kind of slants down a little bit. I can just bring this in here. Starting to look a little bit more squirrel-like. Go to my front view. Probably just want to work on the whole model here. So let's deselect the mask by dragging on the gray area, and just this little thing will unmask it. Let's go to our front view here. Start pushing the cheeks together. It's a little bit too much. Let's back that up. I'm going to reduce my brush size here. Bring in the temples a little bit, the cheeks up a little bit. And we're getting pretty close, I think. Let's bring the corner of the ear in here. Bring the back of the head in. And we want these to kind of come to a point here. Okay. Looks okay. Let's go back into Dynamesh. Re-Dynamesh. I'm going to hold down Shift to smooth this part out. It's looking a little funky. Let's start carving in a little bit of the ear area here. So I'm going to go back into Clay Buildup. Hold down Option. And just kind of scrape in here. You want to be careful when you're doing this. You don't want to scrape too far, because if you do, if I do this, you'll see what's happening on the other side. I get this kind of funkiness where clay is sticking out the back. Let's back up. And if that happens actually, and then you Dynamesh again, you'll see it looks terrible. So let's back up. And be careful not to carve in too much. I think the eyes could probably use a little bit more volume here. If we want to add eyeballs, there's a few ways you can do that. You can do it the sloppy way, which is to just start adding clay to it like that, and that looks pretty bad. In ZBrush, you also have brushes that are shapes, mesh brushes. You can't see it because a pure rep is in the way. Let's move it out of the way. If I look over here under IMM Primitives, if I select that, I have a new menu up here where I can actually paint in these shapes. So I would like to paint in a sphere, and I think this sphere number 32 looks pretty good for an eye. And you'll see I still have symmetry available. And of course, that's not what we want it to look like. But one nice thing is that when you use these IMM primitive brushes, it masks off the other parts of the model. So if I move around here and I go and I select move, or I can hit W on the keyboard, I can actually reduce the size of just that object. So I can have eyes in here if I want. Looks good for now. I'm going to go back to draw, and I'm going to hit Control and drag, and that unmasks these eyes. So let's move our PureRef over here, and let's smooth this part out. Just holding down Shift to smooth. We want to add a little smile here. I'm going to use a brush called the Damn Standard Brush. It's actually the Damien Standard Brush, but they call it the Damn Standard Brush. I'm going to reduce my brush size here. And let's take a look at our geometry. It's looking not too bad. I would like these eyes to be in a separate subtool. Let's go to our subtools, and you'll see I just have one thing selected. If I want to split off these eyes, what I can do is go down to Split, and if I want to just select the eye, I can hold down Control, Shift, clicked on the eye, and it hides everything else. And I can split hidden. So that puts my eyeballs in one tool and my head in another. So now I have the eye separated from the body. Let's add in a smile. So let's bring back up our reference. And let's just start carving in a smile. So let's mask off this area right here. It'll make it easier to work with. So I'm just carving in a little bit. My pressure is not too high here. It's only at 33. Let's bring that up just a little. I can start digging in a little bit deeper. And I can start maybe bringing out a little bit of a mouth corner here. Let's unmask that. It's good enough for now. And I'm starting to get some of that janky topology, so let's make sure that Dynamesh is selected. Go down to Geometry, Dynamesh, and click Dynamesh. That should help us if I were to start carving in here. Dynamesh it. Doesn't look perfect. Maybe we can increase the resolution a little bit. Let's try 200. And if I Dynamesh again, get a little bit more resolution there. One thing I could do here is I could pinch this together. I could find my pinch brush. Pinch. And what pinch does is holds the area together like this. I could actually use this in other parts of the model if I wanted to. Let's say over here on the ear, start bringing that in together. Bring it to a point up here. Let's go back to my clay buildup brush. Start to carve in that ear a little bit more, holding down Option. And then I could actually use my Damien Standard brush to maybe carve in a little bit more here. Gives me a little bit more finer detail. Carve this area a little bit. Maybe give the eyes a little bit more love there too. Let's bring the size down, bring the intensity down. Just trying to get close to what I had done here. I highly recommend using a tablet, letting the pressure of the tablet do the work. In other words, I press really hard here, I let go and I get a light line, just like painting in Photoshop. Let's see how we're doing here from the front view. It's looking not too bad. The ears definitely not looking fantastic. Adding a little more depth to the cheek here. Let's maybe try polishing this a little bit. I'm going to use the H polish brush to view the planes of the face a little bit more. H polish usually works better with a larger size brush and a low intensity. I start brushing, starts flattening out these areas, but not too much. Smoothing it out, hence the name polish. I actually think it comes in really handy when it comes to making stylized characters, especially if you like a look with sharp edges. It can really add a lot of interest to your model. Try to start adding some more volume with the clay buildup brush again. So we're getting somewhere. Looking a little lumpy. Maybe add a little bit to the mouth and nose down here. Holding down Option and moving to the side, and I just want to bring the nose in a little bit like that. Maybe a little bit more up here. A little bit more here. Can put some nostrils in there. Let's use our damn standard brush for that. Where are you, damn standard brush? There you are. Let's increase the intensity a little bit. I'm going to add a little line here. And we can pinch that with the pinch brush again. It's looking a little bit different. We can actually bring in the whole area of the side here if we want to. I'm going to select Move Topology. Put on my poly frame here. Bring that in a little bit. Give it more of a downward slope. Bring out the cheeks a little bit. I find myself constantly tweaking when I'm sculpting. I find it relaxing, actually. Let's make this smile a little bigger. Smile's good. Kind of goes up a little higher. Getting somewhere here. Not bad. Ears could be better. Cheeks could be poofier. Maybe inflate the cheeks a little bit. Turn off my lines. So I think that gives you a general overview of ZBrush and how you can start just mocking up concept art, characters, all kinds of stuff. If you're really interested in seeing more about ZBrush, there is more in here than I could ever hope to actually cover. We could actually box model something if we wanted to. And just to quickly show you what that would be, I could go in here to my symbol brush. Let's not do that. Do not switch. I'm going to add another sphere in. Append a sphere, not a circle, a sphere. Actually, a circle might work. Let's solo that. Here's my circle. I'm going to go down to Initialize and create a cube. And now I have the cube that I could start working with. And of course, I could just use my regular sculpting tools and start moving this around. But what I want to do is be able to work with this like I would in Cinema 4D with hard surface modeling or box modeling. I think we can close that. Close this. I'm going to go into a brush called the Z Modeler brush. Basically, it's a box modeling system where you can extrude polygons. So if I go over an edge here, it's going to do something different than if I were on a polygon. If I go over a point, it's going to do something different as well. And the way we can actually see how it's functioning is by spacebar. If I go over the polygon and hit spacebar, I have this complicated mess of buttons, which we will have to review in another tutorial. But essentially what I'm doing is using the Q Mesh button, which is just a very simple way to start blocking things out like this. And you can see how this would work. Let's say I wanted to box model that base form of that squirrel head. We could just bring this area out here. Don't want an edge loop there. Connect this. Start bringing this out. Maybe if I hold down Option, I can select a few of these polygons, bring them up, connect these. There we go. Start bringing out what would be cheeks here. Start getting just the basics of a head like this. So this is one way to go about it. You can see what's possible here. That could be something we cover in another tutorial. But for now, I hope you enjoyed just getting the basics of what ZBrush can do. So that's going to do it for me. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. We went over the basics of sculpting in Cinema 4D just a little bit, and then we went over the basics of ZBrush, and we went ahead and sculpted a fairly decent squirrel head. You let me know what you think. If you'd like to see more tutorials on ZBrush, let EJ know, let me know. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Glanz, DAVEGLANZ. You can visit my website at daveglanzproductions.com. Let me know what you'd like to learn. This was fun. All right, guys. We'll see you in the next tutorial. Cheers.